So at this point, we've just been writing lazy way of testing. But going forward, we're going to actually start writing test cases or unit tests and utilizing test-driven development, where you're writing the unit tests first to meet the requirements of the function or method that you're writing, and then go ahead and write the function or method to pass essentially all the unit tests. And this morning we went over Python unit test. And so Python comes built in with a testing library called unit test. So right here, we went over FizzBuzz. In order to utilize the built-in testing library in Python, you actually have to import it into the spec file that you're writing. So that's where we have import unit test. So it imports the unit test library. Then in FizzBuzz, we do like from the FizzBuzz directory, or from FizzBuzz import the FizzBuzz method. So if I look up here, import the FizzBuzz method. And this is the first time we're actually seeing this type of syntax. We got this thing called a class. We have an uppercase, looks like an uppercase function, but like how we've been defining functions, but it's an uppercase. So we have a class. And then in here, this is where we import the unit test library. And inside the unit test library, there's a class called test case. And inside this test case class, they have methods called this assert equal, and that's how we get access to these built-in methods in the test case class within the unit test library in Python. And you can actually go into the unit test library. It's a unit testing framework built in the Python, and you can actually read the documentation. I've said this before, but coding and being a software engineer is 80% reading and only 20% actually writing code. So if you don't know how to, if one of your test cases, if you're writing a test case and you're trying to see if there's a method to meet the requirements of the test case, you can look here. So in here, it gives a bunch of examples. You can even go down to the bottom and see what built-in methods there are. Where is it? Yeah, like unit test. There's a bunch of built-in methods that you can use. So setup, teardown, and here are these assert equals, assert not equals, assert true, false, is not. So here are all these other built-in methods that you can use. It kind of gives you specifically what it actually kind of tests. So that's in Python. What if we wanted to test files in JavaScript? So for example, want to write some unit tests for factorial. And in today's lecture, all this stuff what John did this morning is in today's lecture for Thursday, May 17th or May 7th. So you can actually go through and literally just go through and pretty much copy and paste and like read through the lecture that he did this morning. But once we get down to actually writing unit tests in JavaScript, it's a little bit different. I saw somebody post in Slack, like, are we using Jest as a testing framework for JavaScript? And there's plenty of other different types of frameworks or libraries, testing libraries in JavaScript in place of Jest. There's Mocha, Chai, Enzyme for React. There's a bunch of stuff. So in our challenges today, we're going to solve today's challenges in JavaScript and Python. For the Python challenge, we want to use test-driven development in the testing framework we taught you today. So that's using the unit test framework through spec files that are included with driver code that helps you drive your development. They aren't as robust as unit tests. So when we just give you the basic like this, these aren't as robust as actual unit tests. So for JavaScript, we want to use Jest as it will translate into React testing we'll do later. So where Python has a built-in testing library called unit test, JavaScript does not have any built-in testing framework or testing library. So that's where we do Jest comes in. So I'm going to click on this link. First time writing unit tests in JavaScript. I have no idea how to get started. So I'm clicking on the link. I'm going to read through getting started. So it looks like Jest, js.io. These are the docs. So getting started pretty much gives you a pretty easily read tutorial. It says yarn add dev jest, or we can use npm. We've kind of covered that a little bit, but I'm still not 100% clear. npm install --save -dev jest. Okay, this is the first time we've seen the --save -dev. Don't necessarily know what that means. Jest documentation uses yarn command, but the npm will also work. So throughout this course, we're going to be using npm. So let's get started by writing a test for a hypothetical function that adds two numbers. All right. So I'm gonna run through this first, but first I just want to read everything just to ensure I know exactly kind of what I'm doing. And then it says like, then create a file named sum.test.js. Interesting. That's the first time we've seen like this format, sum.test.js. Const sum require. Cool. So I'm actually going to do this specifically for our factorial. And it says add the following section to your package.json. I don't know what that is. That's the first time I'm seeing this. So finally run. Okay. So I'm going to say, what is a package.json file? Okay. All npm packages contain a file, usually in the project's root directory called package.json. This file holds various metadata relevant to the project. This file is used to give information to npm that allows to identify the project as well as handle the project's dependencies. So I don't know what a dependency is. It's probably my translation is like a dependency is things that your application depends on. So libraries, packages that need to be installed in order for your application or essentially your application or program to actually run successfully. Cool, but like, okay. How do I create a package.json file? Do I just like create it by like normally? Not quite sure. So I'm going to say like, how to create package.json file. This is kind of what I was looking at earlier, creating a package.json file. What is JSON? What is a JSON file?
JavaScript object notation.
Yep, JavaScript object notation. So package.json, creating a new package.json file. So running, all right, to create a package.json file with the values that you supply, we'll use npm init command. All right, I don't know what npm init, this is the first time I'm seeing this. So what is npm init? So npm init is essentially initializes a new package, npm package. So I'm gonna go back to our tutorial and actually create this package. But the first thing I need to do is create a package.json file and run the following command, npm init. So let's see. I'm going to open up a new window. I want to get to CD, code platoon, Lima challenges, ls. I'm going to go into factorial, ls. I'm just going to open this into my current working directory in the current window. Delete that. So I'm in code platoon, Lima Platoon challenges, factorial. Inside that factorial, there's a JavaScript and Python. I want to open this in the current VS Code window. We're typing the command code space -r space period. It's going to open in the current window. And I've got the JavaScript. And I have this factorial. Here's my already like written solution. I've got this spec file. So here is one I want to translate these into actual Jest unit tests. So the first thing I need to do is in my JavaScript directory. So I went down here. Let's zoom in a little bit. I seeded into my JavaScript directory. And I want to run this npm init command to create this package.json file. Npm init, and it's going to run through this utility will walk through how creating a package.json file. It only covers the most common items and tries to guess sensible defaults. So it says my package.name, I'll say like right now it's currently called JS. That's the default in here. So it's at the root directory. So I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to call it factorial. Version 1.0, that's fine. Description, factorial challenge. Entry point, you pretty much just press enter a bunch of times, keywords, enter. Is this okay? It defaults to yes. So this is what my package.json file is going to look like. And I'm going to just press enter. And now you see this npm package.json file get created. So this is what a package.json file initially looks like. Cool. So I've already created a package.json file. Now I'm going to continue following this tutorial. And I'm just going to copy and paste this portion into it. Because I think this is like the syntax of actually writing a unit test. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's go back up to the top. It says getting started. We need to npm install this Jest library. So I'm going to do just literally copy this line. And I want to see what happens when I clear it. I'm still in my JavaScript directory. I'm going to paste in npm install --save -dev. And I'm going to come in over here. I'm going to open up my package.json file and see what changes. So I'm going to click enter. Oh, sorry. Down here in my terminal, I'm going to click enter. So it's going to download Jest library from npm. Depending on how big the library is, it might take a while, but this shouldn't take too long. And just watch my package.json file. So I've got name, version, description, main, scripts, author, and license. Let's see if anything else changes in here. So a bunch of stuff. Git repository, well, a bunch of stuff. Has too many active changes, only subset git. Okay. So it says Jest. So the thing that added. So notice how my package.json file changed. It added this dev dependencies, and it added the Jest library. And right here is the current version that's installed, the current version of the library that I installed. And so down here it says plus added Jest, and then also said added 504 packages from 500 or 346 contributors. And then also added this node modules. So this is essentially all the packages that depend on Jest, or all the packages that Jest depends on. Don't worry about this. This is just some of these modules or packages or libraries requesting funding. So I've got node modules came up, and then this package.json lock file. Don't worry about this. You really don't have to do anything with this. Just know that it exists when you install a package. So I installed it. This is, so if I look over here, this is pretty much the same thing that So a module exports sum, a module exports factorial. And then I want to split this. I'm going to close this package.json file for now. So my factorial, I'm exporting it. I already have the answers. And now I want to convert these to actual unit tests. So I don't actually have to import, like in Python, import Jest. It already knows that Jest is installed because it exists within my package.json file. So I'm going to clear down here. And so adds 1 plus 2 equals 3. So it looks like Jest has this test method that accepts a string as a description and then an arrow function that executes when it runs. It runs this expect. I haven't seen this expect method before. My guess is that it's probably built into Jest. So let's look down. If there's any Jest set up using matching. So it looks like here there's 2b. So it looks from here, for example, test expect is a function. And then we can do .2b, which is another function. So these are all different built-in methods within the Jest framework. To be greater than, to be equal than, to be less than or equal. Looks like there's a bunch of them. Cool. So for factorial, so I can essentially translate this. So expects, let's do the description. Factorial expects factorial 8 to equal 40320. So in here, I can literally copy this factorial 8, come down here. So factorial 8, so actually executes this function, .2b, then I can copy that. I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to delete this. So this is my first unit test in JavaScript. Now, how do I actually run this unit test? I can run the spec file, or, so let's just actually run this. ls node factorial spec JS. It says, oh no, test is not defined. Okay, let's go back to the tutorial. And it says, then create a file named .sum.test.js. So this spec file doesn't conform to the same .test.js. So just for this tutorial, I'm going to change that. There's other ways you can, doesn't have to necessarily be test, but just for this specific tutorial, I'm going to change it. I'm going to do factorial.test.js. All right, cool. Let's read a little bit more. So here, then add the following section to your package.json file. So in my package.json file, I need to add the scripts. Let's see what that looks like. So I open up package.json file, I'll move it over to this window. And I notice I have this thing called scripts. Cool. And we have this thing, script known as test, and it says echo error, no test specified, and essentially exit 1. So I'm just going to replace that with this specific one. So test jest. So in order to run these tests, these unit tests in JavaScript, I'm using a script instead of, I'm using a script to run these test files. So it says, when I run this test script, utilize the Jest framework or utilize the Jest testing library and essentially run Jest tests. Jest unit tests. So in order to run this specific test script, it's not node, and then factorial.test.js, because it says test is not defined, so it's not working right now. So I actually need to execute this test script in npm. So I can literally do npm test. And so it's actually running Jest tests. So this is what unit tests look like in Jest. It says factorial test. So this is the actual factorial name of this. The version is 1.0. Expects factorial 8 to equal 40,320. It says test suites. So I've only written one test suite right there. One passed, one total, number of tests, snapshot, and how long it actually took. Does anybody have any questions up until this point?
Yeah, but may have missed something. How does it know to actually run the factorial.test?
It's just the way Jest looks. Jest will look at any file within this directory and look for a .test.js file. So that's how the Jest framework works. And you can actually change that. It could be .spec, it could be a capital spec, but just for all intents and purposes, we're just going to keep it the way the documentation wants it to be.
To build on his question, I actually have a. Is when you say npm and then you pass the argument test to it, right? That first argument test that you pass it, is it binding it to the script's object literal that the quotes test? Like if you change that and then it's like test one, if you said npm test one, would it still run that?
I actually don't know. Let's check that out. Npm test. So if I run npm test, does anybody know?
I'm just curious if that's how it's detecting.
Yep. Yes. So that's how it is. So if I do npm test one. Yep. Oh. So I think there's built-in commands in npm that are like default.
Yeah, I was just curious if like the npm command was reading package.json and then would somehow do some behind the scenes binding, but I was just curious. I just wanted to see it.
Hey Tom, if you're onto something, I think if you put where it says factorial.test.js, if you change that to test one, I'm wondering if it's using those names for all of that.
Yeah, it might. Yeah.
Yeah, it might be. But just for time's sake, we're going to just keep moving forward. If you want to check that on your own, and if you discover anything, feel free to put it in the Slack channel to let everyone else know. But for at my job, when I've seen it, it's always been .test or .spec or like a capital spec file, like how it was before this. It just denotes that, hey, this is in fact a testing file. And you can also do when you run that test, it can look at any files that matches a specific type of pattern. So you can use regex to, hey, look through all the files in your application that match the specific pattern and then run those tests. Clear. So I just want to make another one. Just go down like that. I can do factorial 4. 24, then 24. And if I clear again and run npm test, factorial test is running. It says test suites, one passed, one total, number of tests. So did one actually fail? So no fails. Let's actually like change it to see what a failure might look like. So this is what a failure will look like. So it lists out the tests up here. Expects factorial 8 to equal 4,000 or 40,320. It's like, okay, green check mark passed. And then it says the next one expects factorial 4 to equal 24. Red X fails. So it says expects factorial 4 to equal 24. It said said expected 23. This is what is expected from here to be, it's expected to be 23, but when I actually ran this function, it received 24. And it says where it actually failed at, but since that's not correct, it should be 24. So my test was wrong. And it says one failed, one passed, 2 total. So if I clear it, run npm test, there we go. So let's just quickly review what we did to get or install npm Jest. I created a package.json file by running the command npm init, which initializes a new npm package, and it'll give you a questionnaire, and you pretty much just have to press enter the entire time to get it. And I think Noah, are you on the line? Isn't there like a quick way to just default to all the default answers in npm? No, I think there is like if you do npm init yes or something like that, or -y, it might default all the answers. But if you just do npm init, creates a package.json file. Then from there, you can install npm jest, npm install --save -dev.jest, saves it as a dev dependency right here. If I just saved it as normal, if I want to install something else and I don't include the -dev, it'll just include it as a normal dependency, not a developer dependency.
So every time you want to test something, you have to run through this?
Anytime you want to set up unit tests, you only have to do it like once for your package or for your application. But yes. And the reason, so you have to have that. So JavaScript doesn't have any native packages installed in the language. So anytime you want to include a package or module or packages are used interchangeably. But anytime you want to install a third-party dependency or third-party package, you have to do npm install whatever package you want. So a bunch of developers got together and wrote this testing package or testing framework for JavaScript. And it's called Jest. There's other ones. There's Chai, there's Mocha, there's Enzyme. Yeah, there's more of them. There's Jasmine. Yeah.
Is the package lock JSON file totally different from just the package JSON file?
Yeah, so this essentially freezes, it lets the developers know that like in order to run this, it essentially freezes, hey, all these dependencies that rely on this Jest framework, like so the Jest framework has other packages that rely on it, or Jest relies, sorry, let's take a step back. Jest relies on other third-party packages in order to run. And this package.json lock file ensures that the current version of those other packages remains static. So if they decide to update like this specific library in the future, that when I download this package or this application, it defaults to the correct version of this specific Jest library. So essentially freezes in time the current version of all the packages that Jest relies on. So it installs the correct version of them. But so you don't really have to know what, like, you don't have to do anything with that.
Okay.
Anybody have any more questions?
Is it possible to do like a global install of the testing framework? Because it said it installed installed like 503 packages or however many, and each package is at least 1 byte. Some of them are probably a little bit larger, but for every single challenge that we'll be doing in JavaScript and doing the testing framework, we'll be basically installing or re-downloading the test framework. Do you know if there's any way to kind of install the framework once at like let's say a higher folder structure?
Install Jest. Does it have its global? I rarely ever install things globally just because it doesn't take up that much. It doesn't run down my machine that much. But yeah, there should be a way to install it globally. Globals. Yeah.
That would be a feature of npm, not Jest itself.
Yeah.
You just use the
npm global
flag.
Yeah, so it'd just be the -G and then the name of the package, and it would install it globally.
Okay, and that would most likely be installed into the one link from the install fest we set up. I guess node version control. I'm trying to remember that. I remember seeing that link that we'd set up in the install fest. So if we do the npm install global, it would actually install and download into that particular folder. Okay.
Yeah, if you're on a Mac and try to do it globally, you might get permission errors, and there's all kinds of Google directed all kinds of links. I ended up having to I just took the easy route, and I took permission of a bunch of the subfolders that it expects you to have permissions for. But there's a lot of different techniques to do it. But you might end up getting errors on a Mac and do some Googling to fix it if you try to do it globally. And that's with any NPM. It's a known issue. There's lots of fixes.
I got a question on generating answers for tests. So like, for example, the FizzBuzz tests. The first two tests are relatively simple, which is just length and type. But the third one, which is somewhat complicated, I would think you would want to create a script to create the answer, but then you're kind of like in a circular thing where how would you create that answer to check against?
Yeah, usually you don't get for FizzBuzz, it's very specific because there's not that many tests you can kind of write. I guess you can write at specifically I think for that specific, for all just instructional purposes, we just here's the answer for it. But you can go into very specifics. Like at index 15, it should say, FizzBuzz or something like that.
It's like a spot check type of thing.
Yeah, you can spot check. There's other ways to do it. You don't always want to be here's the exact. You don't always have to do here's the exact answer.
Right, because most things are going to be pretty complicated, and to generate the answer would be kind of crazy, right?
Yep. So, and that's another way for unit tests. If you want to instead of, you can do a setup. You can actually do some some boilerplate setup before you run your unit test to ensure that whatever answer you want to try to output, you can set up a unit some default variables that you want to pass into your unit tests or your functions to make sure that the expected output should be what it is. But yeah, specifically for FizzBuzz, it's rarely ever going to be like that.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So